Your soulmate is carrying pain in silence. Pay attention. It doesn't show up as sadness right away. It shows up as restraint. As someone choosing their words carefully, holding back reactions, softening emotions that should have space to breathe. You may have felt it in moments that seemed ordinary on the surface, conversations that flowed but felt slightly guarded, laughter that arrived but didn't linger. Nothing obvious enough to point at, yet enough to make you pause. This kind of pain doesn't announce itself because it doesn't want to be a burden. People who carry pain quietly often believe that speaking it aloud would disrupt the balance, create worry, or change how they're seen. So they learn to manage it internally, convincing themselves they're strong enough to handle it alone. Strength, in this case, becomes silence. You might have noticed how presence feels different lately. Not distant, but contained. As if there's something being held back just beneath the surface. When someone carries pain in silence, their energy changes before their behavior does. You feel it before you understand it. That feeling isn't imagination. It's emotional awareness picking up on what words haven't revealed yet. There's often a pattern to this kind of quiet suffering. It shows up in small moments. Delayed responses. Sudden shifts in mood that don't have clear explanations. A tendency to redirect conversations away from anything too personal. These aren't signs of disinterest. They're signs of self-protection. You may find yourself wondering whether it's your place to notice, your place to ask, your place to care this deeply. That uncertainty can make you hesitate. But attention doesn't always require action. Sometimes it requires presence. Sometimes it requires simply not dismissing what you sense. People who carry pain silently often do so because they've learned that vulnerability wasn't safe in the past. They may have been ignored, misunderstood, or made to feel like their pain was too much. So they adapted. They became functional instead of expressive. Capable instead of open. That adaptation helped them survive, but it also isolated them. You might notice that they show up for others more easily than they allow others to show up for them. They listen well. They support. They deflect attention away from themselves. That generosity can mask exhaustion. Giving becomes easier than receiving when receiving feels uncertain. There's a subtle emotional fatigue that accompanies this kind of pain. It doesn't always look like breakdown. It looks like tiredness that rest doesn't fix. Like heaviness that comes and goes without clear reason. If you've sensed that weight, you're sensing something real. At the same time, notice how you're responding. You're paying attention without panic. You're noticing without demanding explanations. That restraint on your part matters. People who carry pain silently often need safety before they can share. Safety isn't created through pressure. It's created through consistency. You may feel an urge to fix things, to offer solutions, to say the right words that will make everything lighter. That urge comes from care. But pain that's been carried quietly for a long time doesn't dissolve through advice. It softens through being seen without judgment. There's a difference between asking questions and creating space. Questions seek information. Space allows truth to emerge when it's ready. Pay attention to which one feels more appropriate in the moments you share. You might notice that when moments of vulnerability almost surface, they're quickly redirected. A joke inserted. A subject changed. An emotional cue glossed over. These interruptions aren't rejection. They're fear responding faster than trust. It's important to understand that silence isn't always about you. It's often about an internal conversation someone hasn't finished having with themselves yet. They may not even know how to articulate what they're feeling. Pain without language is difficult to share. You may feel moments of helplessness, wanting to do more but not knowing how. That feeling doesn't mean you're failing. It means you care without control. Caring without control is honest connection. There's also a quiet courage required on your side. Courage to stay present without overstepping. Courage to acknowledge what you sense without forcing disclosure. Courage to accept that you can't heal someone's pain for them. You might notice that your own emotional awareness has deepened through this. You're learning to read between lines without filling them in. You're learning to sit with ambiguity without rushing resolution. Those skills matter far beyond this moment. People who carry pain silently often fear that if they speak it, they'll be defined by it. They don't want to be seen as broken, needy, or weak. So they keep functioning, hoping the pain will resolve itself if they're patient enough. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it just becomes heavier. Pay attention to how connection feels when you're simply present. When you don't push. When you don't retreat. Presence can be more comforting than any words offered too quickly. You may also need to check in with yourself. Carrying awareness of someone else's pain can be emotionally taxing. Make sure you're not neglecting your own needs in the process. Compassion doesn't require self-sacrifice. There's a delicate balance here. Noticing without assuming. Caring without controlling. Being available without overextending. That balance isn't easy, but it's where trust grows. You might sense that when the pain does find words, it will change the dynamic. Change isn't always loss. Sometimes it's deepening. Sometimes it's clarification. Sometimes it's necessary realignment. Avoiding change doesn't preserve connection. Honesty does. This part of the story isn't about dramatic revelation. It's about attentiveness. About staying aware of what's present even when it isn't spoken. About respecting silence without letting it become invisibility. You're not meant to solve this. You're meant to notice it. Noticing is the first form of care. If this resonates with you, if you felt this quiet weight in someone you care about, take a moment to sit with that awareness instead of brushing it aside. Attention changes things, even when nothing is said. This isn't the moment for conclusions. It's the moment for presence. And presence, when it's genuine, creates the conditions where pain no longer has to be carried alone. It doesn't always look like sadness when someone is hurting deeply. Sometimes it looks like composure held too carefully, like someone making sure nothing spills over. You may have sensed it in how they pause before answering simple questions, or how they change the subject when things get too close to the center of who they are. It's subtle, but once you notice it, you can't unsee it. There's a certain loneliness that comes from carrying pain quietly. Not the kind that comes from being alone, but the kind that comes from being surrounded and still feeling unseen. People who carry pain in silence often learn early that expressing it didn't help, or worse, made things harder. So they adapted. They became contained. Controlled. Reliable. On the outside, they look steady. Inside, they're exhausted. You might notice that they rarely complain, even when life gives them plenty of reasons to. They downplay their struggles, brushing them off with a half-smile or a casual comment. Not because the pain isn't real, but because they don't want to make it anyone else's problem. Independence becomes armor. Strength becomes habit. Pay attention to how they show care for others. Often, people who carry pain silently are deeply attentive to everyone else's emotions. They listen closely. They remember details. They anticipate needs. This outward focus can be a way of avoiding their own inner world, where things feel heavier and less organized. You may have felt moments where you wanted to reach out, to say something that opens the door. Then you hesitated, unsure if it was your place. That hesitation isn't weakness. It's awareness. You sense that whatever is being held inside them isn't small, and you don't want to mishandle it. There's a difference between being private and being isolated. Privacy is a choice. Isolation is a defense. When pain has gone unacknowledged for too long, isolation can start to feel safer than vulnerability. If you've noticed them pulling inward while still showing up outwardly, that's not contradiction. It's survival. You might notice how their energy changes depending on the environment. Around others, they seem fine, even lively. In quieter moments, something shifts. Their shoulders drop. Their eyes linger. Their presence softens in a way that suggests relief mixed with weariness. Those moments tell the real story. It's easy to assume that if someone wanted help, they would ask. But people who carry pain silently often don't know how to ask anymore. They've learned to manage alone. Asking feels unfamiliar, even risky. It requires admitting that something is heavier than they can handle by themselves. You may feel an urge to reassure them, to remind them they're strong, capable, admired. While reassurance comes from care, be mindful. Sometimes people who are hurting don't need to be told they're strong. They need permission to not be strong for a moment. There's also the possibility that they don't fully understand their own pain yet. Pain without language is difficult to share. It exists as tension, fatigue, restlessness. It shows up in sleep patterns, in sudden irritability, in quiet withdrawal. They may still be sorting through it themselves. Notice how they respond when you ask genuine questions. Do they deflect quickly? Do they give partial answers? Do they change the subject gently but firmly? These responses aren't rejections. They're signals that the door isn't closed, but it's guarded. You might also notice that they are particularly sensitive to being a burden. They apologize unnecessarily. They hesitate before expressing needs. They may even minimize their feelings before you have a chance to respond. That reflex often comes from past experiences where their pain wasn't met with understanding. There's a kind of dignity in carrying pain quietly, but there's also a cost. Over time, unexpressed pain doesn't disappear. It settles. It hardens. It starts to shape how someone sees themselves and the world. That's why attention matters now, before silence becomes identity. Pay attention to how you feel around them. Do you sense a heaviness that isn't yours? Do you feel a pull to slow down, to be more present? Emotional attunement works both ways. Sometimes you feel someone's pain before they ever name it. You may wonder if acknowledging it will make things awkward or worse. That fear is natural. But being seen doesn't intensify pain. Being unseen does. Even quiet acknowledgement, without forcing conversation, can shift something internally. Sometimes it's not about saying the perfect thing. It's about creating moments where they don't have to perform wellness. Moments where silence isn't pressured to be cheerful. Moments where they can exist without explanation. You might notice that they avoid moments of stillness. Stillness allows pain to surface. Distraction keeps it at bay. Busyness becomes a refuge. If you see them constantly occupying themselves, it may not be productivity. It may be avoidance. There's also a tenderness required on your side. Tenderness not to pry, not to rush, not to make assumptions. Pain carried in silence often needs patience more than solutions. It needs time to trust that it won't be dismissed again. You may feel uncertain about how long to wait, how much space to give. There's no formula. Pay attention to consistency. Trust is built through repeated experiences of safety, not single gestures. Notice whether they soften slightly when you simply listen. Whether their breathing slows. Whether their posture relaxes. These small changes matter. They signal that something inside is responding, even if words don't follow yet. It's also important to care for yourself here. Being attuned to someone else's pain can stir your own emotions. Make sure you're not absorbing more than you can hold. Compassion doesn't require self-erasure. You might find that this experience is changing how you view connection. You're learning that closeness isn't just about shared joy. It's about shared capacity for discomfort. That realization deepens emotional maturity. There's a quiet strength in staying present without demanding disclosure. It communicates respect. It says, "I see you, even if I don't know everything yet." That message can be profoundly healing. People who carry pain silently often open up gradually. Not in dramatic confessions, but in fragments. A sentence here. A moment there. Trust grows in increments. Be patient with that pace. You may also notice moments where they almost say something, then stop. Don't rush to fill that space. Let it exist. Sometimes the courage to speak needs a moment longer than we expect. This phase isn't about fixing anything. It's about awareness. Awareness changes the atmosphere. It makes silence less lonely. If you felt this story resonate, if you recognize someone you care about in these moments of quiet endurance, trust that your attention already matters more than you realize. Pain carried in silence doesn't need spectacle. It needs gentleness. And gentleness, when it's consistent and genuine, creates the safety where silence eventually finds its voice. It doesn't surface as a cry for help. It surfaces as endurance. As someone continuing to show up, continuing to function, continuing to care, even when something inside them is quietly unraveling. You may have noticed that they rarely slow down on their own. Slowing down would mean feeling, and feeling would mean opening doors they've kept shut for a long time. There's a particular kind of pain that learns how to coexist with daily life. It doesn't interrupt schedules. It doesn't demand attention. It settles into the background and becomes familiar. When pain becomes familiar, people stop questioning it. They assume this is just how life feels now. Heavy, but manageable. Tiring, but normal. You might notice that they laugh easily, but the laughter doesn't linger. It fades quickly, like it was borrowed energy rather than something that came from rest. Borrowed energy runs out fast. That's why quiet pain often shows up as sudden exhaustion without obvious cause. Pay attention to how they handle moments of vulnerability from others. They may be compassionate, patient, deeply understanding. Sometimes excessively so. People who carry pain silently often become safe spaces for everyone else because they know what it feels like to not have one. Giving becomes easier than receiving. You may sense that when attention turns toward them, they gently redirect it. Compliments are brushed aside. Concern is minimized. Not because it isn't appreciated, but because it threatens the balance they've worked hard to maintain. Balance, for them, means staying in control of their emotional exposure. There's often a history behind this. A time when being open didn't lead to comfort. When sharing pain led to dismissal, judgment, or abandonment. Those experiences teach a lesson that settles deep: don't show too much. Handle it yourself. Stay composed. You might feel a subtle sadness when you realize this. Not pity, but recognition. Recognition that strength has come at a cost. That resilience was built out of necessity, not choice. Notice how they respond to kindness. Sometimes it's received warmly. Other times it's met with hesitation, even discomfort. Kindness can feel unfamiliar to someone who learned early to rely on themselves. Receiving requires trust, and trust takes time. You may feel moments where you want to reassure them that they don't have to carry everything alone. That urge comes from care. But be mindful of timing. Words offered before safety is established can feel intrusive, even when they're well-intended. There's a difference between inviting openness and expecting it. Invitation feels gentle. Expectation feels heavy. People carrying silent pain are sensitive to that difference, even if they can't articulate it. You might notice how their mood shifts in private versus public settings. In public, they're steady. In quieter moments, something softens, or sometimes hardens. That contrast isn't inconsistency. It's relief mixed with fatigue. Pay attention to how often they apologize. Apologizing for taking time. Apologizing for feeling tired. Apologizing for needing space. Excessive apologizing often signals someone who feels their needs are inconvenient, even when they're reasonable. There's also a way pain shows up in how someone plans for the future. They may hesitate to imagine too far ahead. Not because they lack hope, but because hope feels risky when the present already feels heavy. Staying focused on now feels safer. You might feel confused by this restraint. You may wonder why someone who cares deeply still holds back. Holding back doesn't mean lack of care. It means fear of adding weight to a system that already feels overloaded. Sometimes silent pain isn't about one specific event. It's cumulative. A series of disappointments. A pattern of unmet needs. A long stretch of being the strong one. Cumulative pain doesn't have a clear starting point, which makes it harder to explain. You may notice that they downplay their struggles by comparing them to others. saying things like it could be worse or others have it harder. Comparison becomes a way to invalidate their own pain before anyone else can. There's a quiet loneliness in that habit. Pain doesn't disappear because someone else has it worse. It simply goes unacknowledged. Notice how they respond to rest. Sometimes rest feels uncomfortable. Slowing down allows thoughts and feelings to surface. Discomfort can make rest feel unsafe, even when the body needs it desperately. You might also sense that they avoid asking for help even when it's clearly needed. Asking feels like failure to someone who equates self-reliance with survival. That belief doesn't change easily. It softens through repeated experiences of support that doesn't come with cost. There's a tenderness required here. Tenderness that doesn't try to fix. Tenderness that doesn't rush. Tenderness that allows them to set the pace. Healing doesn't happen on a schedule. It happens in safe conditions. You may feel moments of frustration. Wanting to do more. Wanting them to open up already. That frustration is understandable. Just be careful not to let it turn into pressure. Pressure closes doors that patience opens. You might notice that your own awareness has grown sharper through this. You're learning to notice energy, not just words. You're learning to sit with complexity without demanding resolution. These skills matter deeply in any meaningful connection. There's also a need to check in with yourself. Carrying awareness of someone else's pain can quietly drain you if you're not careful. Make sure you're not neglecting your own needs in the process. Compassion doesn't require depletion. Pay attention to the moments when they seem slightly more open. A longer pause. A deeper sigh. A brief admission quickly followed by humor. These moments are openings, even if they close again quickly. Acknowledge them gently, without pushing. Sometimes the most supportive thing you can do is normalize the presence of pain without making it the center of everything. Saying things that communicate acceptance without interrogation. Being steady rather than intense. You might notice that they test safety in small ways. Sharing something minor. Observing your reaction. Seeing whether it's met with understanding or dismissal. Trust builds through these micro moments. Be mindful of how you respond. Staying calm. Staying present. Not rushing to advice. Not minimizing. These responses matter more than grand gestures. There's a reality to accept here. You can't carry their pain for them. You can't make it disappear through care alone. But you can change how alone they feel with it. That shift can be life-changing. You may feel moments of deep connection when you simply sit together in silence. Silence that isn't awkward. Silence that feels shared. Shared silence can be more comforting than conversation. People who carry pain silently often need time to believe that their pain won't make them less valued. That belief takes repetition. It takes consistency. It takes seeing that care doesn't disappear when vulnerability appears. You might notice that when they do open up, it may come out fragmented. Not a polished story. Not a clear narrative. Just pieces. Feelings without structure. Let it be messy. Messy honesty is still honesty. There's a quiet bravery in even small admissions after long silence. Recognize that bravery internally, even if you don't name it out loud. Respect the courage it takes. This phase isn't about resolution. It's about recognition. Recognition of pain. Recognition of patterns. Recognition of the strength it took to carry what's been carried. You're learning that paying attention doesn't mean assuming responsibility for someone else's healing. It means staying present without turning away. That presence alone can soften things that felt immovable. If this story resonates, if you recognize someone you care about in these quiet patterns, trust that your awareness already matters. Noticing is the first step toward connection that doesn't require silence. Pain carried in silence doesn't need to be exposed. It needs to be held with care. And care, when it's patient, consistent, and genuine, becomes the place where pain eventually feels safe enough to rest. It doesn't reveal itself through words, but through small breaks in routine. A change in rhythm. A moment where their energy dips for no clear reason. You may have felt it when they took longer to respond, or when they smiled but their eyes didn't follow. These aren't dramatic signs. They're quiet indicators that something inside them is asking to be noticed. There's a kind of pain that doesn't want to be solved. It just wants to exist without being questioned or explained away. People who carry pain silently often fear that once it's spoken, it will be analyzed, judged, or minimized. So they keep it internal, believing it's safer to manage alone than risk misunderstanding. You might notice that they're especially good at staying busy. Their calendar stays full. Their mind stays occupied. Stillness is avoided, not consciously, but instinctively. Stillness creates space, and space invites feelings. When pain has been held down for a long time, feelings can feel overwhelming once they surface. Pay attention to how they react when plans are canceled or when things slow down unexpectedly. Sometimes irritation appears where flexibility should be. That irritation isn't about the change. It's about what the change brings up internally. You may sense that they're deeply thoughtful, yet hesitant to share their thoughts. Conversations stay on safe ground. Personal reflections are hinted at, then redirected. This isn't lack of trust in you specifically. It's lack of trust in the outcome of vulnerability itself. There's often a belief underneath silent pain that says, if I open up, things will get worse. That belief doesn't come from imagination. It comes from experience. From times when openness led to disappointment or loss. Once that belief forms, silence feels protective. You might feel moments where you want to reassure them that you can handle whatever they're carrying. That reassurance matters, but it's often not enough on its own. Trust isn't built through words alone. It's built through repeated experiences of safety. Notice how they respond when you simply stay present without fixing. When you listen without interrupting. When you don't rush to make sense of things. Those moments are where trust quietly grows. You may also notice that they struggle to receive care directed at them. Compliments are deflected. Offers of help are declined politely. Care can feel unfamiliar, even threatening, to someone who learned to survive independently. There's a particular vulnerability in being cared for. It requires letting someone see where you're tired, where you're unsure, where you're not okay. For someone used to being the strong one, that exposure can feel destabilizing. You might notice that they often check in on you, asking how you're doing, making sure you're okay. That attentiveness can sometimes mask their own unmet need to be checked in on. Giving attention feels safer than receiving it. Pay attention to the moments when they seem slightly surprised by your consistency. When you show up without being asked. When you don't disappear after a difficult moment. Those reactions reveal expectations shaped by past experiences. There's also a way silent pain affects self-perception. People carrying it often see themselves as burdensome, even when others don't. They internalize the idea that their pain is inconvenient. This belief keeps them quiet, even when they're hurting deeply. You may feel moments of helplessness, wanting to reach inside and ease the weight you sense. That desire is human. Just remember that healing doesn't come from removing pain for someone. It comes from making space for it to be acknowledged safely. You might notice that they minimize their struggles with humor. Jokes appear right when conversations get close to something real. Humor becomes a shield, a way to maintain control while still engaging socially. There's nothing wrong with humor. But when it consistently interrupts vulnerability, it signals avoidance. Avoidance isn't laziness. It's fear doing its job too well. You may also notice physical signs. Restlessness. Difficulty relaxing. Tension held in the body. Silent pain often settles physically because it has nowhere else to go. The body carries what the voice does not. Pay attention to how they respond to touch, to closeness, to moments of quiet intimacy. Sometimes there's comfort there. Sometimes there's stiffness. These responses aren't about you. They're about what's being held inside. You might find yourself questioning whether you're imagining all this. That doubt is common when pain isn't openly acknowledged. Just remember, emotional awareness isn't about certainty. It's about sensitivity to patterns. There's a fine line between noticing and assuming. Stay on the side of noticing. Noticing leaves room for truth to reveal itself. Assuming closes that room too quickly. You may feel moments where your own emotions get stirred. Concern. Sadness. Even frustration. Those feelings deserve attention too. Caring for someone else doesn't mean ignoring your own internal responses. There's an emotional maturity developing in you through this process. You're learning to sit with complexity without demanding resolution. You're learning that not everything meaningful is immediately clear. People who carry pain silently often open up not through grand conversations, but through consistency. Through someone staying when they expect distance. Through someone listening when they expect dismissal. You might notice that they test the waters with small disclosures. Mentioning being tired. Admitting stress briefly. Sharing something personal, then quickly moving on. These moments are invitations, even if they're tentative. Respond gently. Acknowledge without overwhelming. Let them know you heard, without turning it into an interrogation. Sometimes a simple acknowledgement does more than a deep conversation. There's also a point where you may need to decide how much you can hold. Compassion doesn't require you to ignore your limits. It's okay to recognize when you need support too. Pay attention to whether caring for them feels draining or grounding. Draining suggests imbalance. Grounding suggests mutual presence. Healthy connection allows both people to breathe. You might notice that your patience has deepened. You're not rushing them. You're not rushing yourself. You're allowing things to unfold at a pace that respects emotional safety. There's a quiet courage in that patience. It resists the urge to control outcomes. It trusts that honesty, when it comes, will come because the conditions were right. You may also notice moments where they seem lighter around you, even if nothing is said. That lightness matters. It means your presence is offering something real, even without words. This phase isn't about extracting pain into the open. It's about reducing the loneliness around it. Loneliness is what makes pain unbearable. Shared presence makes it survivable. You're learning that paying attention isn't passive. It's an active form of care. It requires awareness, restraint, and empathy. If this story feels familiar, if you recognize someone you care about in these quiet signs, trust that your attention is already meaningful. You don't need perfect words. Pain carried in silence doesn't need to be fixed immediately. It needs to be met with steadiness. And steadiness, offered without pressure or expectation, becomes the place where silence slowly learns it doesn't have to be alone anymore. It doesn't arrive as a breakdown. It arrives as control held a little too tightly. As someone choosing composure even when their body is asking for rest. You may have noticed that they rarely let themselves fall apart, even in moments where it would make sense to. That restraint isn't strength alone. It's survival refined over time. There's a particular kind of pain that teaches a person to stay upright at all costs. They've learned that leaning too much on anyone feels risky. So they stay balanced, even when balance takes effort. Even when it hurts. Even when the weight inside them keeps growing quietly. You might notice that they often anticipate problems before they happen. Planning, adjusting, preparing. This isn't just responsibility. It's hyper-awareness shaped by past instability. When pain once arrived unexpectedly, the mind learned to stay alert. Alertness becomes a habit long after the danger has passed. Pay attention to how they handle uncertainty. They may prefer predictability, routines, familiar patterns. Not because they lack imagination, but because unpredictability stirs anxiety they'd rather not face. Control becomes comfort. Familiarity becomes safety. You may feel moments where you sense tension beneath their calm exterior. A tightness in their voice. A sharp inhale before they speak. A hesitation that suggests they're choosing words carefully. These moments are small, but they carry information. People who carry pain silently often struggle with letting go. Letting go of roles. Letting go of responsibility. Letting go of the idea that they must hold everything together. If they stop holding on, they fear everything will fall apart. That fear isn't irrational. It's learned. You might notice that they rarely ask for reassurance, yet seem deeply affected by it when it's offered sincerely. Reassurance touches something tender they've learned to protect. It reminds them of what it feels like to be supported, which can be both comforting and unsettling. There's also a way silent pain shapes identity. They may see themselves as the dependable one, the strong one, the problem solver. These identities become shields. Without them, they're not sure who they'd be. Vulnerability threatens that structure. You may feel moments of admiration for their resilience, followed by concern for the cost of it. Both feelings can coexist. Strength that isn't shared eventually becomes heavy. Even the strongest structures need support. Notice how they respond to mistakes. Their own mistakes may be met with harsh self-judgment. Perfectionism often accompanies silent pain. If they're flawless, they don't risk criticism. If they don't risk criticism, they don't risk reopening old wounds. You might sense that they struggle to rest mentally. Even in quiet moments, their mind stays active. Thinking, processing, replaying. Mental rest requires safety, and safety isn't easily accessed when pain has gone unacknowledged for too long. Pay attention to how they respond when you slow things down. When you don't rush. When you're patient. Sometimes they relax into it. Other times they become uneasy. Slowing down removes distractions. It invites feeling. There's a difference between being busy and being purposeful. Silent pain often hides in busyness. Purpose allows rest. Busyness avoids it. If you see constant motion, ask gently whether it's fulfilling or deflecting. You may notice that they struggle to name what they need. Not because they don't have needs, but because they've learned not to prioritize them. Needs were postponed. Delayed. Minimized. Over time, identifying them becomes difficult. There's a quiet sadness in that. Needs don't disappear when ignored. They wait. They surface later as fatigue, irritability, disconnection. The body remembers what the voice didn't express. You might feel an urge to encourage them to open up, to remind them they're allowed to need support. That encouragement matters, but be mindful of tone. Invitation feels different than insistence. Safety grows through invitation. You may also notice that they're particularly sensitive to perceived disappointment. They work hard to avoid letting others down. This sensitivity often comes from early experiences where mistakes felt costly. Approval became protection. Pay attention to how they react when they think they've disappointed you. Do they withdraw? Overcompensate? Apologize excessively? These reactions reveal underlying fear, not lack of care. There's a way silent pain affects trust. Trust becomes conditional. I can trust if I stay in control. I can trust if I don't reveal too much. These conditions feel necessary, even when they limit intimacy. You might feel moments of frustration when you realize how much they're holding back. That frustration is understandable. Just remember, silence was once a solution for them. It kept them functioning. Letting go of it takes time. Notice how they respond to emotional consistency. When you show up steadily, without dramatic shifts. When your care doesn't depend on their performance. Consistency challenges old beliefs gently, without confrontation. There's also a point where you may need to reflect on your own capacity. Supporting someone who carries silent pain requires patience and boundaries. Make sure you're not sacrificing your own well-being in the process. You might notice that they open up more through shared experiences than direct conversations. Doing something together. Sitting quietly. Being present without pressure. Some truths surface sideways, not head-on. Pay attention to moments where they let their guard down briefly. A sigh. A comment about being tired. A rare admission of stress. These moments are meaningful, even if they pass quickly. Responding with calm acknowledgement rather than alarm helps. It tells them they can be human without things spiraling. That message is powerful. There's a gradual unlearning happening when silent pain is met with steady care. Unlearning the belief that vulnerability equals danger. Unlearning the habit of carrying everything alone. This unlearning isn't linear. There will be progress and retreat. You may feel moments where nothing seems to change. Then suddenly, something shifts. A little more openness. A little less tension. Healing often moves quietly, then noticeably. You might also notice that this process is changing you. You're becoming more patient. More observant. More comfortable with complexity. These qualities deepen your emotional intelligence. At the same time, remember that you are not responsible for their healing. You can support, but you cannot replace their own willingness to face what they're carrying. That responsibility belongs to them. There's an emotional honesty required here. Honest about what you can offer. Honest about what you need. Honest about when things feel heavy. Honesty protects both people. You may find that as they feel safer, their pain becomes more visible. That visibility can feel intense at first. It doesn't mean things are getting worse. It often means trust is increasing. Pain that's been silent for a long time doesn't emerge neatly. It comes in waves. Be patient with the messiness. Messy honesty is still honesty. There's a quiet courage in continuing to show up without demanding change. That courage communicates acceptance. Acceptance softens defenses over time. You might also need to accept that some pain will take longer to process than you'd like. Timelines for healing are personal. Rushing them often backfires. Pay attention to your own emotional signals. If you feel drained, take that seriously. Care doesn't mean self-neglect. Healthy connection requires two supported people, not one holding everything. This phase isn't about fixing or resolving. It's about witnessing. Witnessing pain without turning away. Witnessing resilience without glorifying the cost of it. If this resonates, if you recognize someone you care about in these patterns of endurance and restraint, trust that your awareness already matters. Attention changes dynamics quietly. Pain carried in silence often isn't looking for solutions. It's looking for permission to exist without judgment. And permission, when it's offered with patience and steadiness, becomes the doorway through which pain can finally begin to loosen its grip. Sometimes the real ending doesn't arrive when the pain is finally spoken out loud. It arrives much earlier, in a moment so quiet it's almost missed. A moment when you realize you noticed. Not because someone asked you to, not because they explained themselves, but because something inside you stayed alert when it would have been easier to look away. You may not have had the full story. You may never know every detail of what they carried. But you felt the weight of it anyway. In the pauses. In the restraint. In the way they kept showing up while clearly carrying more than they admitted. That awareness wasn't accidental. It was connection doing what it does best when it's real. People who carry pain in silence don't usually want to be saved. They want to know that if they ever did fall apart, they wouldn't be abandoned. They want to know that their exhaustion wouldn't scare someone away. That their vulnerability wouldn't become something they'd regret. And most of all, They want to know that they wouldn't become a burden just by being honest. What you offered wasn't answers. It wasn't pressure. It wasn't a demand to open up before they were ready. You offered steadiness. And steadiness is rare. It tells someone, without saying it, that they don't have to perform strength all the time to be worthy of care. There's a moment, often unseen, where someone who has carried pain quietly starts to loosen their grip. Not dramatically. Not all at once. Just enough to breathe a little deeper. Just enough to rest for a moment without bracing for impact. That moment doesn't come from advice. It comes from safety. Safety is built when someone notices without interrogating. When they stay without hovering. When they don't disappear the second things feel heavy. You may never fully understand how much that mattered, but it mattered more than any perfectly chosen words ever could. You might have expected an ending that looked clearer. A conversation where everything was finally laid out. An explanation that tied all the loose ends together. But real life rarely gives us endings that neat. Sometimes the ending is internal. Sometimes it's the quiet shift where pain no longer feels completely alone. There's a deep kind of healing that happens when someone realizes they don't have to keep everything contained forever. That even if they're not ready to speak yet, someone is paying attention. Someone is present. Someone isn't turning away just because things aren't easy. You didn't force change. You allowed space. And space is what pain needs when it's been ignored for too long. Pain that's rushed retreats deeper. Pain that's respected slowly softens. This experience may have changed you too. You may notice that you're more patient now. More observant. Less quick to judge silence as indifference. You've learned that quiet doesn't always mean empty. Sometimes it means full of things that haven't found words yet. You've also learned that caring doesn't mean carrying everything for someone else. It means staying grounded enough not to lose yourself while you care. That balance matters. Love that costs you your own stability isn't love that lasts. There may still be moments where you wonder if you did enough. If you should have said more. If you should have pushed harder. Be gentle with yourself. Healing isn't a performance, and care isn't measured by how much you do. It's measured by how present you are when it matters. If the pain does eventually find words, it will do so in its own time. And when it does, it will meet a version of you that's already steady, already aware, already capable of responding without panic. That readiness didn't happen by accident. You grew into it. And if the pain never fully finds words, that doesn't mean your presence was wasted. It means you were part of a chapter where someone didn't have to carry everything alone, even briefly. That matters more than resolution. Not every story ends with closure. Some end with capacity. Capacity to hold complexity. Capacity to stay open without losing yourself. Capacity to love without needing to control outcomes. If you're listening to this and it feels personal, if you recognize someone in your life who carries more than they show, let this be your reminder that attention is powerful. You don't need perfect timing or perfect language. You need honesty, patience, and steadiness. And if this story resonated with you, if it felt real instead of exaggerated, take a moment to like it so it can reach others who might need this reminder. Subscribe if you want more stories that speak to real emotional experiences, not surface-level drama. And if you feel comfortable, leave a comment. Sometimes saying, "This felt familiar," is enough to remind someone else they're not alone. Pain carried in silence doesn't ask for spectacle. It asks for presence. And sometimes, presence is what quietly begins the healing long before anything is ever said. It happens quietly, almost imperceptibly, the moment when you realize this story was never just about them. It was also about who you became while paying attention. While others moved on, distracted or uncomfortable with silence, you stayed present. You noticed the pauses. You felt the weight behind the composure. And without fully understanding why, you chose not to turn away. There's something profoundly human about that choice. You may not have said much. You may not have done anything dramatic. But presence is never passive. Presence is an act of care. And when someone carries pain in silence, care is felt long before it is spoken. Long before it is explained. Long before it is even understood. What you offered wasn't solutions. It wasn't pressure. It wasn't insistence that they open up before they were ready. You offered something far rarer. You offered emotional safety. The kind that doesn't demand performance. The kind that doesn't disappear when things feel heavy. The kind that says, without words, "You don't have to pretend with me." People who have learned to survive quietly often believe their pain makes them difficult to love. They think vulnerability is something that must be rationed, controlled, hidden behind competence and strength. And so they keep going. They keep showing up. They keep carrying more than they admit, convincing themselves that silence is easier than risking rejection. But something shifts when someone notices without asking them to explain. Something loosens when pain is allowed to exist without being interrogated, analyzed, or minimized. When it isn't rushed toward healing or forced into neat sentences. When it's simply allowed to be present, held by another human who doesn't flinch. You may never fully know what changed inside them. Healing doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it looks like a deeper breath. A softer posture. A moment of rest that lasts a few seconds longer than usual. Sometimes it looks like them letting their guard down just enough to feel human again. And sometimes, that's enough to begin.
This experience may have changed how you see silence. You know what? That silence isn't always distance. Sometimes it's a language, a protective one, a language learned in environments where speaking didn't feel safe. And while silence shouldn't be romanticized, it also shouldn't be dismissed. You learn how to listen to it. There may still be moments when you wonder what would have happened if things were said sooner or said differently. That's natural. But don't let those questions overshadow what was real. You showed up in a way that mattered. And the kind of showing up leaves an imprint, even if it doesn't come with closure. Not every story ends with answers. Some story end with capacity. The capacity to sit with discomfort without panicking. The capacity to care without controlling. The capacity to remain open without losing yourself. The capacity will follow you forward. It will shape how you love next, how you listen, how you recognize pain without being consumed by it. And now, how you choose connection that feels safe, mutual, and emotionally honest. If you are listening to this and it feels personal, if you saw someone you care about reflected here, or if you recognize yourself in the quiet endurance described, pause for a moment before moving on. Let yourself acknowledge that is mattered. If this story resonated, take a second to like it. That small action helps this reach people who are quietly carrying more than they show. Subscribe if you want more story like this. A story that honor emotional depth without exaggeration or noise. And if you feel ready, leave a comment. Even a single sentence, sometimes words became the reminder someone else needed who feels seen. Not every ending need resolution. Not ending leave you wiser. Some leave you softer. Some leave you human than before. And those are the endings that they stay with long after the story is over.